Did you know that Saint Teresa of Jesus had a vision so deeply disturbing about cremated souls that for days she could neither sleep nor eat? What she witnessed during that mystical revelation forever changed her understanding of the human body's destiny and the suffering that so few souls can endure. In the deepest mystical writings of Saint Teresa of Jesus, we find revelations that the Church has kept quietly in the background for centuries. Among these extraordinary visions, there is one that left an indelible mark on the sainted doctor of Avila, a direct and intimate knowledge of the suffering experienced by souls whose bodies are given over to the fire of cremation. This is not something you will hear in a Sunday homily. This is the knowledge reserved for those who have the courage to venture into the darkest mysteries of the spiritual life. Saint Teresa, in her mystical ecstasies, bore witness to the indescribable pain that pierces the soul when its earthly temple is consumed by flames that do not purify but torment. Original documents from the Convent of the Incarnation reveal details that very few people know. Accounts from sisters who witnessed the saint's condition after these visions. Days of unrelenting tears, desperate prayers offered for unknown souls, and urgent warnings about decisions families make without understanding their eternal consequences. If you feel called to protect your soul and the souls of your loved ones, write in the comments, "Saint Teresa, guide me." Stay with us until the very end, because you will discover the specific prayer that Saint Teresa herself used to bring relief to these suffering souls. Before we begin, strengthen your faith. Give this video a like if you seek the truth, no matter how painful it may be, and subscribe if you want to protect your eternal destiny. On August 15, 1577, in the deep silence of cell number 7 at the Convent of the Incarnation, Saint Teresa of Jesus experienced one of the most disturbing visions of her mystical life. It was not a revelation about heaven or the joys of a soul united with God. It was something altogether different, something that would compel her to write desperate letters to her confessors and bishops throughout the months that followed. According to manuscripts preserved in the secret archive of the Vatican, Teresa described this experience as an involuntary descent into regions where the soul suffers in ways that the human mind cannot fully comprehend. In her own words, "I saw souls weeping with a weeping that produces no tears, but that tears apart the very essence of their being." The vision began during prayer after Compline. Teresa recounts how her soul seemed to be carried to a place unlike any purgatory she had known from her earlier experiences. This was a different space, one where souls appeared suspended in a particular kind of agony. What struck her most forcefully was not the fire she witnessed, but the specific nature of their suffering. These souls, Teresa wrote in a confidential letter to Father Geronimo Gracian, experience a pain that comes not only from their temporary separation from God, but from something far deeper. It is as though a fundamental part of their identity has been violently torn away, leaving a wound that cannot be healed through the ordinary means of purification. In this vision, Teresa observed something that left her completely bewildered. The suffering souls shared one common characteristic. All of them had been separated from their bodies by fire. Not the purifying fire of purgatory, but the destructive fire of earthly cremation. That distinction, according to the revelation she received, was essential to understanding the nature of their suffering. Saint Teresa describes in her personal notes how these souls explained their torment to her. The body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and when this temple is desecrated by the destroying flame before the moment appointed by God, the soul experiences a rupture that goes far beyond natural death. This rupture, according to the vision, created a kind of spiritual echo of the physical pain the body endured during cremation. What frightened Teresa most was not merely witnessing this suffering, but understanding that many of these souls had arrived at this condition through decisions made by their families with the best of intentions, yet in ignorance of the eternal consequences. How can earthly love cause such eternal torment? The saint asked in the writings she produced in the wake of that vision. In the days following this revelation, the sisters of the convent documented Teresa's condition. Sister Maria de San Jose wrote, "Our founding mother went 3 full days without being able to take any food. She wept continuously, repeating, 'They did not know what they were doing.' When we asked why she suffered so deeply, she would only answer, 'For the souls that burn without being purified.' The vision continued to reveal specific details about the nature of this suffering. The souls showed Teresa how cremation interrupts a natural spiritual process that must unfold between the soul and the body during gradual decomposition. It is like pulling a flower from the ground before it has finished bearing its fruit, Teresa explained to her confessor. The soul is left incomplete in its process of separation. But what she witnessed next left her trembling for days. Teresa watched as some of these souls, in their desperation, attempted to reach out to their living families in order to warn them about future decisions. Yet their attempts at communication produced spiritual disturbances in those homes, a pervasive sense of unease, recurring nightmares among family members, and a persistent feeling of an anguished, restless presence. In her letters to the Bishop of Avila, Teresa describes the most striking conclusion of the vision. These souls cannot access the ordinary means of relief that God has provided for the souls in purgatory. Their suffering requires specific interventions, particular prayers, and sacrifices that very few people know about or are willing to make. Saint Teresa understood that in this vision, she had received not only knowledge, but also a responsibility. She had to find a way to help these souls, and more urgently to warn the living about the consequences of decisions that seemed merely practical or cultural, but carried eternal repercussions. The transformation in Teresa following this vision was profound. She began incorporating into her teachings specific references to the body's dignity as a sacred temple, intensified her penitential practices on behalf of forgotten souls, and developed particular methods of prayer tailored to this form of spiritual suffering. The archives of the monastery of St. Joseph reveal a secret correspondence that would forever transform St. Teresa's understanding of cremation. Father John of the Cross, before he became the great mystic we know today, was a young priest entrusted with the most difficult cases in the Diocese of Avila. In 1578, he came to Teresa bearing a confession that had robbed him of sleep for months. "Mother Teresa," he wrote in a letter dated March 3, 1578, "I must share something with you that has kept me awake for weeks. I have witnessed events that challenge everything I understand theologically, and I need the wisdom of someone who knows the divine mysteries as you do." Father John described the case of Doña Catalina de Mendoza, a noble widow from Salamanca, who had arranged to be cremated following a practice she had encountered during her travels to distant lands. The woman had died in a state of grace, having received the last sacraments and having lived an exemplary life of Christian charity. Yet what happened after her cremation left the young priest deeply shaken. The family began to experience inexplicable disturbances. Father John's letter continued. These were not mere coincidences or the natural grief of bereavement. They were specific events that seemed to follow a pattern and carry a clear purpose. He described how Doña Catalina's children began having the same dream every night. They saw their mother surrounded by flames that did not consume her, but that clearly caused her unbearable pain. What was most unsettling was that Doña Catalina, in these dreams, was not asking for ordinary prayers. She was asking for something specific, something none of the family could understand. "You must repair what was broken in the fire." This phrase appeared word for word in the dreams of every member of the family, from the eldest son to the youngest grandchild. Saint Teresa responded to this letter without delay, and her reply, preserved in the Carmelite archives, reveals the depth of her understanding of the phenomenon. Father John, what you describe confirms the vision the Lord granted me last year. The soul of Doña Catalina is not condemned, but neither can she access the normal process of purification. She is in an intermediate state that requires specific reparation. Father John then shared with Teresa something he had hesitated to mention, and his next revelation was even more striking. During a mass he offered for the repose of Doña Catalina's soul, he experienced something he had never encountered in all his years of priestly ministry. At the moment of the consecration, he sensed an invisible yet intensely powerful presence beside the altar. It was not a malevolent presence, he wrote to Teresa, but neither did it carry the peaceful quality that normally accompanies souls of purgatory during the Holy Mass. Without audible words, but with absolute clarity, the presence communicated a message that left him trembling. The fire that touched me was not the fire of God. This spiritual communication was so overwhelming that Father John had to pause for several minutes before he could continue the celebration. But the most unsettling revelation came days later. Father John discovered that other priests in the region had begun reporting similar cases. Father Miguel de Avila had documented the story of a merchant whose cremated remains prompted his business associates to develop an inexplicable aversion to entering the chapel where his ashes were kept. Father Antonio de Segovia reported disturbances in a noble family following the cremation of its patriarch, strange odors, and a persistent sense that something was not at peace. Mother Teresa, Father John wrote in a subsequent letter, "We are confronting something that does not appear in any theology manual. These souls are not lost, but they are not traveling the normal path towards salvation either. It is as though they have become trapped in a state that requires specialized intervention." Saint Teresa's response was immediate and resolute. She established a special protocol of prayers to be followed in such cases, and instructed Father John in specific practices she had received through her mystical visions. "You must understand, Father, that the body is not simply a temporary vessel. It is an integral part of God's plan for each soul, and its premature destruction by unnatural means creates consequences that go far beyond what we can see." Saint Teresa also revealed to Father John something that would forever reshape his ministry. She had begun receiving visions about similar cases in different parts of Spain. "The Lord is showing me that this problem will grow in the future," she wrote. "I must prepare myself to teach others how to assist these souls in their particular need." Father John carefully documented every instruction he received from Saint Teresa, creating what would become the first guide for handling cases of souls disturbed by cremation. This document, preserved in the secret archive of Salamanca, contains methods of prayer, specific acts of penance, and rites of reparation that Saint Teresa had received directly through her mystical visions. The collaboration between Saint Teresa and Father John revealed something fundamental. These were not isolated incidents, but manifestations of a spiritual phenomenon that required its own specific understanding and tools for resolution. In her deepest mystical writings, Saint Teresa of Jesus documented with striking precision 7 distinct types of suffering experienced by souls separated from their bodies through cremation. These are not the ordinary pains of purgatory, but unique torments that require specialized understanding in order to bring relief. The first pain, the breaking of the sacred bond. Saint Teresa describes this suffering as the silent cry of the soul upon finding itself violently torn from its temple. In her visions, she observed how these souls experience a relentless sensation of being wrenched away from something essential to their very identity. It is as though a fundamental part of their being has been amputated without spiritual anesthesia, she wrote in her personal notes. This pain manifests as a desperate longing of the soul to reconnect with something that no longer exists. Souls in this condition endure constant confusion about who they are, asking themselves again and again, Where is my temple? Where is the dwelling God gave me? The second pain, the fire that does not purify. In Teresa's revelations, the second torment arises from the soul's deep confusion between two entirely different kinds of fire. The fire of purgatory cleanses and sanctifies, she explained to her nuns, but the fire of cremation only destroys without purifying. Cremated souls carry a painful spiritual memory of the destructive fire that touched their body, creating a spiritual aversion that drives them away from the very purifying fire they need for their salvation. Saint Teresa observed in her visions how these souls, when they attempt to draw near the purifying fire of purgatory, relive the trauma of the cremation, creating a cycle of suffering that keeps them separated from the very purification they desperately need. The third pain, the interruption of the natural process. God established a natural order for the separation of soul and body. Saint Teresa wrote in a letter to Mother Anne of Saint Bartholomew, when this process is abruptly interrupted, the soul experiences an incompleteness that generates constant suffering. This pain presents itself as an unending sense that something crucial was left unfinished, a spiritual task that can never quite be completed. The souls describe this torment as being forever on the verge of completing something essential, but never quite being able to do so. It is an agony of perpetual expectation that finds no resolution through ordinary means of grace. The fourth pain, extreme spiritual loneliness. The fourth pain is so intense that few souls can bear it without specialized help. Saint Teresa described it as a loneliness that goes beyond separation from God. These souls experience a profound isolation from the communion of saints, as though their condition has placed them in a spiritual space where they cannot receive the ordinary consolation that other souls in purgatory receive from the blessed. It is like being in a room full of people who are all speaking a language you can no longer understand, Teresa explained to her confessors. This isolation feeds upon itself, creating a suffering that grows exponentially. The fifth pain, the traumatic memory of the fire. Cremated souls carry the spiritual memory of the precise moment the fire consumed their body. Unlike natural death, where separation is gradual and allows for a gentle, progressive detachment, cremation creates a traumatic memory that replays itself constantly in the soul's experience. Saint Teresa observed how these souls continually relive the moments of the destroying fire, not as a recollection, but as a present and unceasing experience. They cannot escape that moment, she wrote, because it has become a permanent part of their spiritual condition. The sixth pain, the inability to intercede for the living. In her most detailed visions, Saint Teresa discovered that cremated souls temporarily lose their natural ability to intercede effectively for their loved ones who are still alive. This discovery deeply moved her, as she understood that entire families were being deprived of the spiritual protection that the faithful departed in a state of grace would ordinarily provide. They long to help their families, Teresa wrote, but their condition restrains them. It is like having one's hands bound, spiritually speaking. This pain intensifies when they witness their loved ones facing spiritual trials or dangers, unable to offer the help they so desperately want to give. The seventh pain, anguish for the living. The last and most complex of the pains arises when cremated souls come to understand the consequences of their example. They experience a special anguish upon seeing that their own cremation may influence the decisions of other family members, perpetuating the cycle of spiritual suffering. Saint Teresa described this torment as the pain of Abraham, who sees that his choices affect generations yet to come. These souls suffer not only for their own condition, but for the indirect responsibility they bear in the future cremations of their descendants. The revelation of the remedy. At the conclusion of her visions concerning these 7 pains, Saint Teresa received a deeply hopeful revelation. Each of these sufferings has a specific remedy. God permits no pain without also providing its medicine, she wrote. But these spiritual medicines must be administered by living souls who understand the particular nature of each torment. The saint developed precise methods of prayer, penance, and sacrifice to address each of the 7 pains, creating a complete system of spiritual relief that calls for the active participation of living family members and the specialized intercession of holy souls. Among all the testimonies documented by Saint Teresa of Jesus, one stands apart for its extraordinary nature and the lasting impact it had on the saint's life and mission. It is the case of Sister Beatrice of the Assumption, a discalced Carmelite from the convent of Medina del Campo, whose death and subsequent spiritual manifestation provided Teresa with direct evidence of the consequences of cremation. Sister Beatrice had been an exemplary religious woman for 32 years. Her superiors described her as a woman of deep prayer, rigorous penance, and heroic charity toward her sick sisters. When she died in April of 1579, she seemed destined for a peaceful passage into eternal glory. However, her older brother, influenced by progressive ideas of the era, decided to have her body cremated, overriding the traditions of the convent. It was a decision made with good intentions, Saint Teresa later wrote to the Bishop of Salamanca. Don Fernando believed he was honoring his sister's humility, following practices he had observed during his travels to the East. He did not understand that he was interfering with a sacred process. 3 weeks after the cremation, something extraordinary began to unfold at the convent of the Incarnation, where Saint Teresa was staying temporarily. During the singing of Vespers on May 15th, Teresa experienced a spiritual manifestation that left her completely shaken. "I saw Sister Beatrice standing near the altar," Teresa wrote in her personal diary, "but her appearance was unlike any soul from purgatory I had seen before. She did not radiate the serene peace of those who suffer in the process of purification. Her face bore an anguish that broke my heart." The apparition of Sister Beatrice lasted approximately 10 minutes, during which she communicated specific information to Saint Teresa about her post-mortem condition. "Mother Teresa," she conveyed, without any audible words, "my soul cannot find rest. The fire that touched my body has created a barrier that prevents me from accessing normal purification. I am suspended in a state of suffering that is not damnation, but neither is it the ordinary path toward glory." What struck Saint Teresa most powerfully was the detailed account Sister Beatrice gave of her experience immediately following death. "When my soul separated from my body," the apparition explained, "I expected to encounter the merciful love of the Lord. Instead, I felt as though an essential part of my identity had been violently torn away. It was not physical pain. It was something far deeper." Sister Beatrice described how she had tried to move toward the divine light she could perceive in the distance, but found spiritual obstacles she could not understand. "It was like walking through a maze where every step brought me back to the starting point. I could not advance toward purification because something fundamental was incomplete in my bodily separation." Saint Teresa documented every detail of this communication, particularly because Sister Beatrice revealed information that no one else could have known. The apparition referenced private conversations she had shared with Teresa years earlier, intimate details of her interior life that only she could have known, and prophecies about future events that were subsequently fulfilled exactly as foretold. "The authenticity of this manifestation is beyond question," Teresa wrote to her confessor, Father Domingo Bañez. "Sister Beatrice provided me with proof of her identity that no demon could possess, and her message is entirely consistent with the revelations I have received on this subject at other times." The apparition continued to explain to Saint Teresa the specific consequences of her cremation. "My body was the temple in which the Holy Spirit dwelt during my years of religious consecration. When it was consumed by fire before the time appointed by God, a rupture was created in my spiritual identity that requires specific reparation. Sister Beatrice also revealed that she was not alone in this condition. There are many souls in a similar situation, she communicated to Teresa. Good souls, holy souls even, who have been placed in this condition by the well-intentioned decisions of their families. They need specific help that can only come from living souls who understand the nature of our suffering. Her final words were a desperate warning that Saint Teresa would never forget. Mother, you must teach others how to help us. Our numbers are growing, and very few souls on earth know the proper methods to bring us relief. If you do not act soon, thousands of good souls will remain trapped in this unnecessary suffering. The manifestation ended with Sister Beatrice teaching Saint Teresa a specific prayer, word by word, to be offered for cremated souls. This prayer, which Teresa transcribed immediately after the vision, contained unique elements not found in any traditional prayer of the Church. The impact of this encounter on Saint Teresa was transformative. She immediately began researching similar cases, established correspondence with confessors throughout Spain to document related phenomena, and developed a specific ministry for these particular souls. Most significantly, the experience with Sister Beatrice convinced Saint Teresa that she had a responsibility to preserve this knowledge for future generations, knowing that the issue of cremation would grow with the passage of time. I must write down everything I have learned, she noted in her diary, so that the souls of the future will have the tools they need to help their loved ones in this specific condition. In the secret manuscripts of the interior castle, Saint Teresa of Jesus develops a revolutionary teaching on the nature of the human body, one that few people have ever studied in depth. Her mystical revelations showed her that not all bodies are equal before God, and that the manner in which they are treated after death determines the kind of suffering the soul will experience. The body of a baptized Christian is not simply mortal flesh, Teresa wrote in a confidential letter to Cardinal Quiroga. It is a temple that has been consecrated by the Holy Spirit from the moment of baptism. This consecration creates a sacred union between soul and body that transcends physical death. Saint Teresa received in vision a detailed understanding of 3 distinct categories of human bodies, each with specific implications for post-mortem treatment. This mystical classification, never included in her published works as it was deemed too advanced for the ordinary Christian, reveals truths that completely transform one's perspective on cremation. The first category, consecrated bodies. The bodies of priests, religious brothers, and religious sisters occupy the most sacred category in Saint Teresa's revelations. These individuals have dedicated their very flesh to the direct service of God, she explained to her nuns during spiritual conferences. Their bodies have been instruments of grace through the sacraments, contemplative prayer, and heroic sacrifice. In her visions, Teresa observed that when these bodies are cremated, the souls experience a particular suffering she described as the weeping of a desecrated temple. It is like burning a consecrated church, she wrote. The spiritual damage goes far beyond the physical act and affects the soul's eternal relationship with its priestly or consecrated identity. Teresa documented specific cases of cremated religious whose convents subsequently experienced spiritual disturbances, inexplicable difficulties in communal prayer, a widespread spiritual aridity among the sisters, and a pervasive sense that something sacred had been violated. The second category, bodies of holy fathers and mothers. Saint Teresa revealed that the bodies of fathers and mothers who raised their children in holiness acquire a particular dignity before God. These bodies have been instruments of divine grace in forming holy souls, she explained. Their hands have offered blessings, their lips have taught prayers, their arms have consoled with Christian love. When these bodies are cremated, Saint Teresa observed that the souls experience what she called the pain of the interrupted inheritance. The souls feel that they are unable to fully pass on the spiritual blessings meant to flow to their descendants. "It is like cutting down a tree before it has finished bearing all its fruit," she wrote in her mystical notes. The third category: bodies of converted sinners. The bodies of people who lived in sin but made a sincere conversion before death represent the third category in Saint Teresa's hidden teachings. These bodies have been transformed by the grace of repentance, she explained. Though they sinned, divine mercy purified them before death. When these bodies are cremated according to Teresa's visions, the souls experience the pain of the frustrated victory. They had succeeded in overcoming sin and were ready for normal purification. But cremation places them in a condition where they must face additional sufferings that are inconsistent with their final state of grace. The revelation of the cry of the bodies. Saint Teresa explains why some bodies cry out more than others during and after cremation. In her deepest mystical experiences, she discovered that the intensity of the soul's suffering is directly proportional to the degree of consecration the body had achieved during earthly life. A body that served God more intensely experiences greater desecration when cremated, she disclosed in her private writings. It is not that God punishes holier souls more severely, but that the violation of something more sacred produces greater spiritual pain. This revelation explains why the families of saints and religious often experience more intense disturbances when they choose cremation. The holy soul suffers more because it had more to lose, Teresa wrote. Its union with the body was more perfect, and therefore its violent separation is more traumatic. The mystery of the eternal connection. Saint Teresa revealed that the connection between soul and body does not end completely with physical death. There is a spiritual bond that must be gradually undone according to the divine plan, she explained to those under her spiritual direction. Cremation severs this bond abruptly, like cutting a rope while someone is slowly and carefully rappelling down. This eternal connection explains why the relics of the saints retain spiritual power and why the Church has traditionally venerated the bodies of the blessed. This is not superstition, Teresa wrote, but the recognition of a spiritual reality that goes beyond ordinary human understanding. The prophetic warning. In her final visions on this subject, Saint Teresa received a prophetic warning about the future. Times will come when cremation is seen as normal, even preferable. In those days, the suffering of cremated souls will multiply because there will be very few people who understand how to help them. This prophecy led Teresa to develop specific methods of spiritual assistance and to carefully document her teachings, knowing they would be needed by future generations who would face this problem on a far greater scale. Saint Teresa of Jesus developed a system of spiritual discernment that enables families to recognize when a cremated soul is experiencing the specific sufferings she had witnessed in her visions. These signs, documented in her private letters to confessors and spiritual directors, function as an early warning system, a call to intervene spiritually before the soul's suffering intensifies. God, in His infinite mercy, does not allow souls to suffer in complete silence, Teresa wrote to Father Geronimo Gracian. He always provides signs to the living so that they can offer help. But these signs must be recognized and correctly interpreted. The first sign: disturbances in the family's sleep. The first and most common of the signs Saint Teresa identified are specific disturbances in the sleep of the immediate family members of a cremated loved one. These are not ordinary nightmares related to grief, but spiritual manifestations with very particular characteristics that distinguish them from normal dreams. When a cremated soul is suffering intensely, Teresa explained to the Mother Superiors of other convents, its anguish communicates spiritually with those who share its blood or its deepest bonds of love. This communication manifests as recurring dreams in which the deceased appears in situations of suffering specifically connected with fire. Family members report dreams where they see their loved ones surrounded by flames that do not consume them, but that clearly cause them pain. Most characteristic of all, in these dreams the deceased never speaks directly, but conveys an urgent message through gestures or expressions that family members understand immediately. Help me. Something is wrong with what was done to my body. Saint Teresa documented that these dreams follow a specific pattern. They begin approximately 3 weeks after the cremation, occur during the early hours of the morning, between 2 and 4 a.m., and grow in intensity if no corrective spiritual measures. The frequency and intensity of these dreams indicates the level of the soul's suffering, she wrote in her notes on spiritual discernment. The second sign, spiritual aversion to sacred places. The second sign, more subtle but equally significant, is the development of an inexplicable aversion or discomfort in family members towards spiritual places and practices that previously brought them peace. Saint Teresa observed this phenomenon in multiple families who had chosen cremation. It is as though the suffering of the cremated soul creates a spiritual interference that affects the ability of its loved ones to receive grace in the normal way, she explained in her private conferences. This interference manifests in specific ways that the saint learned to recognize. Family members begin to experience restlessness during Mass, particularly at the moment of the consecration. They sense a disturbing presence that is not malevolent, but that prevents them from focusing in prayer. Some report physical sensations, a sudden chill, mild dizziness, or a feeling of heaviness in the chest that appears only during the most sacred moments of the liturgy. Teresa noted that this spiritual aversion also extends to the places where the ashes are kept. Families begin unconsciously avoiding the area where the deceased's ashes are stored, she documented. They find reasons not to spend time in that room, or they feel an inexplicable unease whenever they must do so. Even more telling, family members develop an unconscious resistance to praying specifically for the soul of the cremated loved one. They feel as though their prayers are not getting through to the soul, Teresa wrote, as if a spiritual barrier is preventing the normal communication between the living and the dead that characterizes the communion of saints. The third sign, phenomena of a disturbing presence. The third sign, the most dramatic, but also the clearest, consists of direct spiritual manifestations of the cremated soul's presence in the family home. Saint Teresa carefully distinguished these phenomena from malevolent apparitions or from the ordinary consolations that souls in purgatory provide. These presences are not malicious, Teresa explained, but neither do they bring the characteristic peace of souls undergoing normal purification. They are presences that communicate urgency, need, and a specific plea for help. Families report inexplicable physical sensations. A gentle touch on the shoulder during moments of silence, the feeling that someone has sat down on the bed during the night, or a cool draft of air that appears at specific moments related to prayer or to a mention of the deceased. Particularly significant is the phenomenon that Teresa called the search for the lost body. Family members experience episodes where they sense a presence moving through the house from room to room with a palpable restlessness. It is the soul searching for its lost temple, Teresa explained. It finds no rest because part of its identity was destroyed prematurely. If your family has made this choice, it is essential to recognize these signs without delay. Saint Teresa developed specific methods to confirm that these phenomena genuinely represent communications from a cremated soul in suffering, distinguishing them from other spiritual or psychological causes. The Teresian confirmation system. To verify that these signs truly indicate a cremated soul in suffering, Saint Teresa established a 3-step protocol: a specific prayer of discernment, careful observation of temporal patterns, and confirmation through the intensification of phenomena during prayers directed specifically toward the cremated soul. If the signs intensify when you pray specifically for the reparation of the harm caused by the cremation, Teresa wrote, then you have confirmation that the soul needs your specialized help. In the deepest revelations granted to Saint Teresa of Jesus, we find a fundamental distinction that transforms the Catholic understanding of fire and its role in the soul's destiny. Through multiple mystical ecstasies, the sainted doctor was a direct witness to both kinds of fire, the fire that purifies and sanctifies, and the fire that destroys without offering any spiritual benefit whatsoever. In my vision of February 2nd, 1580, Teresa wrote in her most private mystical notes, "I was carried in spirit to witness two simultaneous scenes that revealed to me a terrible and beautiful truth at one and the same time. In the first scene, she observed souls in purgatory being purified by divine fire. In the second, she witnessed souls that had been touched by the fire of earthly cremation, the divine fire of purgatory. Saint Teresa described the purifying fire with details that are both sobering and spiritually precise. This fire possesses a divine consciousness," she explained to those under her spiritual guidance. "It knows exactly which aspects of the soul need purification, and it works with the precision of a heavenly surgeon operating with infinite love." In her visions, Teresa observed how the fire of purgatory adapts itself perfectly to each individual soul. For some souls, it burns with a gentle but steady intensity, like a glowing ember that warms without scorching. For others, it comes in intense bursts that quickly purify specific faults. The essential point is that this fire always produces visible spiritual progress. The souls in the purifying fire radiate a strange kind of joy, Teresa documented. They suffer intensely, yet they understand that every moment of pain draws them closer to eternal union with God. Their suffering has purpose, direction, and certain hope. Teresa observed how the souls in purgatory communicate with one another during the purification process, forming a community of hope where the more advanced souls console those who have newly arrived. There is a brotherhood in purifying suffering that generates peace even in the midst of the most intense pain. The destructive fire of cremation. In complete contrast, Saint Teresa witnessed the nature of the fire used in earthly cremation and its effects on souls. "This fire possesses no divine consciousness," she wrote, her horror evident in every word. "It is a fire created by human hands with no purifying purpose, driven solely by human will to destroy what God formed to be preserved." Teresa saw both fires at work simultaneously, and the contrast left a permanent mark on her. The fire of cremation operates without spiritual discernment. It destroys indiscriminately both the holy and the ordinary aspects of the body, without distinguishing between what must be purified and what must be honored. This indiscriminate destruction creates profound spiritual confusion within the soul. While the fire of purgatory reveals the soul's true identity by cleansing what conceals it, Teresa explained, the fire of cremation confuses the soul about its own nature, destroying spiritual marks that were meant to remain until the final resurrection. In her most detailed visions, Teresa observed how souls touched by the fire of cremation attempt to draw near the purifying fire of purgatory, but experience a traumatic reaction. It is as though the memory of the destructive fire fills them with terror of the very fire they need for their salvation, she documented. The difference in spiritual effects. Saint Teresa was unequivocal. One fire purifies, the other destroys. And this difference carries eternal consequences that very few people understand. In the fire of purgatory, every moment of suffering removes a specific obstacle between the soul and God. The progress is constant, measurable, and leads inevitably toward eternal glory. In contrast, the suffering caused by cremation produces no automatic spiritual progress. It is pain without a direct purifying purpose, Teresa explained. It does not cleanse sins or draw the soul closer to God. It simply causes suffering. Suffering that must first be healed before normal purification can begin. the differential healing process. The most hopeful revelation Saint Teresa received was the understanding that both types of suffering have a solution, but that they require entirely different approaches. For the souls in purgatory, we need traditional prayers, masses, and works of charity, she wrote. For cremated souls, we must first heal the trauma of the destructive fire before we can help them with their normal purification. Teresa developed what she called the dual healing protocol. First, specific prayers to heal the trauma of cremation. Second, traditional suffrage practices to assist with the soul's ordinary purification. The reserved teaching. This distinction between the two fires, Teresa wrote in her final letter on the subject, must be taught with care and wisdom, not to terrify families who have already chosen cremation, but to equip them with the spiritual tools they genuinely need to help their loved ones. Saint Teresa understood that she had received this revelation not to condemn, but to provide hope and concrete means of spiritual assistance in situations that traditional theology had not fully addressed. In the early hours of October 21st, 1580, after weeks of spiritual anguish over the cremated souls she had seen in her visions, Saint Teresa of Jesus received what she would describe as the most extraordinary grace of her entire mystical life on this subject. During an ecstasy that lasted more than 2 hours, Jesus Christ himself dictated to her, word by word, a specific prayer to relieve the suffering of souls violently separated from their bodies. Jesus Christ appeared to me with an expression of infinite compassion, Teresa wrote in her most secret mystical diary, preserved in the archive of the Carmel of Avila. He said, "My daughter, I have seen your sorrow for these forgotten souls. I am going to teach you how to heal what human fire has damaged, using the power of my divine fire." The prayer she received bears no resemblance to any traditional prayer of the Church. It contains unique elements that address specifically the nature of the spiritual trauma caused by cremation. It is not an ordinary prayer of petition, Teresa explained to her most spiritually advanced nuns, but a prayer of reparation that works as direct spiritual medicine. The unique elements of the prayer. The first element that makes this prayer distinctive is its structure of dual healing. It first addresses the healing of the trauma caused by the destructive fire, and then facilitates the soul's access to the purifying fire it needs for salvation. It is like cleaning a wound before applying medicine, Teresa explained. The second revolutionary element is the specific invocation of Christ's authority over death and resurrection. This prayer does not simply ask for mercy, Teresa wrote, but invokes the specific power of Christ to repair what was damaged in the natural order of separation between soul and body. The third unique component is the inclusion of an offering of substitution, in which the person praying offers their own sufferings to alleviate specifically the cremation trauma of the soul for whom they intercede. Christ showed me that the innocent suffering of the living can heal the traumatic suffering of the dead, Teresa revealed. The first case of application. The first opportunity to test the efficacy of this prayer came when Teresa learned of the suffering of Sister Beatrice of the Assumption. She immediately gathered the sisters of the convent and taught them the prayer exactly as she had received it. We must pray it for 9 consecutive days, she instructed, with partial fasting and offering our small mortifications for the healing of her soul. The complete prayer revealed. In her most secret manuscripts, Saint Teresa transcribed the exact prayer that Christ dictated to her. This prayer begins with a specific invocation of the power of the resurrection over death and decay. Jesus Christ, Lord of life and conqueror of death, who rose in a glorified body, showing the final destiny of all sanctified flesh. The second part of the prayer addresses specifically the reparation of the trauma caused by cremation. By the power of your cross that sanctifies all suffering, heal in the soul of name the wound caused by the violent separation from its bodily temple. This phrase, according to Teresa, must be spoken with absolute faith in Christ's healing power. The third section includes the offering of substitution that makes this prayer unique. Accept, Lord, my small sufferings as medicine for the soul of name, and grant him/her access to the purifying fire needed for salvation. Teresa explained that this offering must be sincere and backed by real sacrifices on the part of the one praying. The prayer concludes with a specific request for the protection of the living. Protect the living from the disturbances caused by this suffering, and grant us the wisdom to help all souls who find themselves in a similar condition. The specific requirements for efficacy. Saint Teresa received detailed instructions regarding the conditions that must be met for the prayer to produce its full effects. The person praying must be in a state of grace, confirmed by recent confession. A soul in mortal sin cannot effectively channel healing grace, Teresa warned. The second requirement is the observance of a specific fast during the 9 days of the novena. Not a complete fast, but abstaining from 1 meal per day, offered specifically for the healing of the cremated soul. This sacrifice creates a spiritual bond between the one who fasts and the soul that suffers, Teresa explained. The third requirement, fundamental to the prayer's efficacy, is that it be recited in a place where the Eucharist is present. The closeness of the Blessed Sacrament exponentially amplifies the healing power of the prayer, Teresa documented after multiple applications of the method. The verifiable transformation. Teresa established specific criteria for verifying that the prayer is producing real effects on the cremated soul. The disturbing dreams must cease completely before the 7th day of the novena. If the dreams continue after the 6th day, she wrote, it means that a second novena is needed with more intense sacrifices. The second sign of efficacy is the restoration of ease in praying for the deceased. When the specific prayer is working, Teresa explained, family members recover the ability to feel that their ordinary prayers for the departed are being received and are effective. The third sign, the most conclusive, is the appearance of peace in the places where the ashes are kept. The spiritual atmosphere of the space changes entirely, Teresa documented. From a place of unease, it becomes a place of serene recollection. The result, in the case of Sister Beatrice, was immediate and verifiable. By the 2nd day of the novena, the disturbing dreams in her family had ceased completely. By the 5th day, the brother who had decided on the cremation experienced a deep peace he had not felt since his sister's death. On the 9th day, during the final Mass of the novena, Saint Teresa had a brief vision of Sister Beatrice completely transformed. I saw Sister Beatrice surrounded by golden light, Teresa wrote, free from the suffering that had marked her first appearance. She smiled at me and communicated, the medicine of Christ has healed what human fire damaged. Now I can continue my journey toward glory. The expansion of the method, this prayer achieved what had seemed impossible, providing real and verifiable relief to souls in a spiritual condition for which the mystical tradition of the Church had no established precedent. Word spread quickly among the network of Carmelite convents, and Teresa began receiving requests from confessors across Spain for guidance on similar cases. Every application of this prayer has produced observable results, Teresa documented in a letter to the provincial of the Discalced Carmelites. This is not superstition or imagination. It is real spiritual medicine acting upon a real spiritual condition. Teresa established specific protocols for the correct application of the prayer. It must be prayed by persons in a state of grace, preferably while fasting, and accompanied by specific sacrifices that substitute symbolically for the suffering of the cremated soul. The person praying must be willing to suffer a little in order to greatly relieve the suffering of the soul, she explained. The conditions for efficacy. Saint Teresa discovered that the prayer has greater efficacy when prayed by direct family members of the deceased, particularly those who did not participate in the decision to cremate. The soul recognizes family love and responds more readily, she wrote. However, she also documented successful cases in which people with no family connection were able to effectively help cremated souls they had never known. The most important condition that Teresa identified is absolute sincerity in acknowledging the error that was made. It is not enough to recite the prayer mechanically, she warned. There must be a genuine understanding that cremation caused real spiritual harm and a sincere desire to repair that harm. The promise of Christ. In her final vision connected with this prayer, Jesus Christ gave Saint Teresa a specific promise. Every cremated soul that receives this prayer, applied correctly for 9 consecutive days, will be freed from its specific trauma and will be able to access the normal process of purification. This promise transformed Teresa's entire perspective on the "This is not a hopeless situation," she wrote in her final notes on the subject. "It is a condition that requires specific spiritual medicine, but one that has a certain cure when the right remedy is applied." Among the most reserved archives of the convent of St. Joseph in Avila, there is preserved a document that Saint Teresa titled "The Deadly Errors of Well-Intentioned Families." This manuscript, written in the final years of her life, reveals the devastating pattern she observed in the majority of families facing decisions about the bodies of their loved ones. I have watched for decades as Christian families, moved by genuine love, make decisions that multiply the suffering of the very souls they intend to honor, Teresa wrote, with evident anguish in every word. The most common error is not malice. It is ignorance about the spiritual preparation that must precede any decision about the body's final disposition. The fundamental error. Deciding without preparing the soul, Saint Teresa identified that 9 out of 10 families make the same critical mistake. They make decisions about cremation or burial based solely on practical, financial, or sentimental considerations, without undertaking the specific spiritual preparation the soul needs for either. Families discuss costs, traditions, and personal preferences, Teresa observed, but they forget that the soul of the deceased must be spiritually prepared for the type of bodily separation it is about to undergo. This lack of preparation, according to Teresa's revelations, exponentially multiplies any subsequent suffering. In her most detailed visions, Saint Teresa witnessed how souls that had received specific spiritual preparation before cremation experienced significantly less suffering than those whose bodies were cremated without any prior preparation. The difference is like comparing surgery with anesthesia to surgery without it, she explained to her confessors. The ignored preparation protocol. Saint Teresa developed a specific protocol of spiritual preparation that should ideally be implemented while the person is still alive, but which can also be partially applied after death if carried out within the first 72 hours. God, in His mercy, allows some flexibility in timing for this preparation, she wrote, but its effectiveness diminishes dramatically after the 3rd day. The first step of the protocol is the specific consecration of the body as a temple. This goes beyond a general understanding that the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. It requires a specific prayer in which the soul consciously surrenders its body to God with full awareness of the implications of any subsequent form of destruction. The second step involves preparation for violent separation. Here the soul must consciously accept that its separation from the body will not follow the natural process of gradual decomposition that God originally designed. The soul must say a specific farewell to each part of its body, Teresa explained, acknowledging the holiness that each member acquired by serving God throughout earthly life. The error of divided family decisions. One of Saint Teresa's most important discoveries was the devastating impact of family decisions made without spiritual unanimity. When a family is divided over cremation, she wrote in a letter to Father Domingo Bañez, the soul of the deceased experiences additional suffering arising from the spiritual conflict among its loved ones. Teresa documented specific cases where half the family supported cremation while the other half opposed it. In these cases, the soul experiences what Teresa called the spiritual pull. It feels drawn simultaneously in two opposite directions, generating an additional confusion about its own identity and destiny. The soul perceives the family's division as a division within its own nature, Teresa explained. It does not know whether to behave as a soul that consciously chose cremation or as a soul that was brought to that condition against its spiritual will. The Family Unification Protocol. To resolve these complex cases, Saint Teresa developed a Family Unification Protocol to be implemented before any definitive decision about cremation is made. This protocol requires all immediate family members to participate in 3 days of joint prayer and discernment. It is not enough for the head of the family to decide, Teresa warned. When the eternal destiny of a soul is at stake, the entire family must be spiritually aligned with the decision. The protocol includes specific prayers so that each family member may receive clarity about the spiritual implications of cremation. During these 3 days, each family member must undertake a specific examination of conscience regarding their motivations for supporting or opposing cremation. Decisions based on convenience, cost, or personal preference, Teresa wrote, must be purified until only genuinely spiritual motivations remain. The era of late preparation. Saint Teresa identified that many families attempt to implement spiritual preparation after the decision to cremate has already been made and even publicly announced. This belated preparation, she documented, is significantly less effective than preparation carried out at the proper time. The optimal moment for preparation, according to Teresa's revelations, is during the final hours of the person's life, when the soul is naturally in a state of heightened spiritual receptivity. A soul that consciously prepares for cremation while still living in the body, Teresa explained, can completely transform the nature of that post-mortem experience. When preparation is carried out after death but before cremation, its effectiveness is approximately 60%. The soul already separated from the body can receive some preparation, Teresa wrote, but not with the same depth as when soul and body are still united. The era of mechanical application. The final critical error Saint Teresa identified is the tendency of families to apply methods of preparation and healing in a mechanical way, without the deep understanding and spiritual commitment that these methods require in order to be truly effective. These prayers and protocols are not magic formulas, Teresa warned firmly. They are spiritual medicines that require genuine faith, sincere repentance for the error committed, and a real willingness to transform one's way of thinking about the body as a sacred temple. Teresa observed that families who apply the methods solely to eliminate the disturbing phenomena without genuine spiritual conversion experience results that are temporary and do not last. True healing requires the family to understand and accept the spiritual reality of the harm that was caused, she wrote. Universal preventive preparation. In her final writings on this subject, Saint Teresa developed a method of preventive preparation that every Christian family ought to implement, regardless of their current plans regarding cremation. No family knows when it will face these decisions, she wrote, and preparation made in advance multiplies the effectiveness of any subsequent intervention. In a particular letter to the Bishop of Salamanca, Teresa described the case of a noble family that decided on the cremation of its patriarch on the very night of his death, motivated by the desire to quickly free themselves from the pain of seeing the body. This impulsive decision, Teresa wrote, condemned the soul of a holy man to months of unnecessary suffering that could have been completely avoided with 3 days of spiritual preparation. The error of consulting only human authority. Another critical error identified by Saint Teresa is the tendency of families to consult only with church authorities who have received no specific formation regarding the mystical implications of cremation. Many good and holy priests, she wrote, approve cremation based solely on the fact that the church permits it, without considering the particular spiritual circumstances of each individual soul. Teresa observed that families are satisfied with the general canonical permission without seeking specific discernment as to whether that particular soul is spiritually prepared for that type of bodily separation. It is not enough for something to be permitted, she warned. It must be appropriate for that specific soul in its particular spiritual condition. The preparation that changes everything. If this preparation is not carried out beforehand, the soul's suffering is multiplied many times over, for the soul will be entirely unprepared for an experience that goes against the natural order established by God. Saint Teresa developed a method of preparation that, when applied correctly, can reduce the suffering of cremation by as much as 90%. The method includes 3 essential elements: a conscious consecration of the body to the divine plan, a specific spiritual farewell to each bodily function, and the establishment of a spiritual bridge that allows the soul to maintain some connection with its bodily identity even after physical destruction. When a family correctly implements this protocol, Teresa documented, the soul experiences cremation as a conscious sacrifice offered to God, rather than as a traumatic violation of its temple. This difference in the soul's subjective experience completely determines the nature of any subsequent suffering. Evidence of the method's success manifests immediately in the families that apply it. Peace in their dreams, ease in praying for the deceased, and the absence of the spiritual disturbances that characterize cases of cremation without preparation. In the most personal and prophetic vision Saint Teresa of Jesus ever received on the subject of cremation, she was carried in spirit into the future to observe the specific destiny of souls who would live in modern times. What she witnessed in this final revelation transformed her understanding of the individual responsibility each person bears for the destiny of their own body. I saw future ages where cremation would be as common as burial is in our day, Teresa wrote in her most private prophetic notes. I saw entire generations of families choosing cremation without understanding its implications, creating a mass suffering that could be avoided with the proper knowledge and preparation. The personal vision of each soul. In this extraordinary revelation, Saint Teresa witnessed something that left her profoundly shaken. Christ showed her the specific spiritual future of different types of people based on their decisions about cremation. I saw individual souls, she documented, each one facing the consequences of decisions they had not yet made, but that Christ had known from all eternity. Teresa saw with prophetic clarity what lies ahead for souls who find themselves in this position, and what must be done now to avoid unnecessary suffering. In her visions, she observed 3 distinct categories of modern people and their spiritual destinies as related to decisions about cremation. The first category, prepared souls. Saint Teresa witnessed the destiny of people who, after receiving knowledge about the spiritual implications of cremation, make conscious and informed decisions. I saw souls who chose cremation after complete spiritual preparation, she wrote, and their experience was radically different from those who had not prepared. These souls experienced cremation as an act of conscious oblation, similar to the sacrifice of the martyrs, who willingly offered their bodies to fire out of love for Christ. When the soul is prepared and gives its conscious consent, Teresa explained, the fire of cremation can even become an instrument of active purification, though it remains less perfect than the natural process. Saint Teresa observed that these prepared souls maintain peace throughout the cremation, experience an ordered bodily separation, and quickly access the normal purification processes of purgatory. Their conscious preparation transforms a potentially traumatic act into a sacrifice acceptable to God. The second category, ignorant but well-intentioned souls. In her prophetic vision, Teresa witnessed the destiny of millions of modern souls who would choose cremation without knowledge of its spiritual implications, but with no malice in their intentions. These souls, she wrote, represent the majority of future cases. They are not guilty of decisions made in ignorance, but they experience the natural consequences of interrupting the divine order God established. Teresa observed that these souls experienced the sufferings she had previously documented, but with varying intensity depending on the degree of their personal holiness and the general spiritual preparation they had achieved during their earthly life. Holier souls suffer more intensely, she revealed, because they had achieved a greater union with their bodies as temples of the Holy Spirit. However, Christ showed Teresa that these souls receive special help from divine mercy, particularly through the prayers of living family members who learn, even belatedly, about their condition and apply the healing methods Teresa had received. The third category, rebellious souls. The most troubling category that Teresa witnessed was that of people who, after receiving full knowledge of the spiritual implications of cremation, deliberately choose to proceed out of pride, rebellion, or contempt for Christian tradition. I saw souls who knew the truth but consciously rejected it, Teresa wrote with evident sorrow. These souls experience not only the normal sufferings of cremation, but additional sufferings connected with their conscious rebellion against the divine order. Christ revealed to Teresa that these souls face far greater obstacles to receiving help because their condition includes the additional element of the sin of spiritual pride. They require not only healing from the trauma of cremation, Teresa explained, but also a conversion of the heart that rejected known truth. Your personal and immediate responsibility. The most striking revelation for Saint Teresa was the understanding that every person who receives this knowledge takes on an immediate spiritual responsibility. You cannot remain neutral after knowing this truth, she wrote in her final notes on the subject. Your soul will be judged not only by your own decisions, but by how you use this knowledge to help others. Teresa saw that people who receive this teaching and do not act to protect their own souls or to help others experience a specific kind of spiritual remorse. Knowing the truth creates responsibility, she explained. Ignoring the truth after it has been received multiplies the consequences of any wrong decision. The specific plan of action. Based on her prophetic visions, Saint Teresa established a 3-step plan of action for people who receive this knowledge. First, immediate personal spiritual preparation to ensure that one's own decisions about cremation are grounded in complete knowledge and adequate preparation. Second, active intercession for known cremated souls, applying the specific methods of prayer and reparation that she had received in her mystical revelations. Third, the careful transmission of this knowledge to others, especially to family members and friends who might face similar decisions in the future. In her final vision on this sacred subject, received barely 3 months before her death, Saint Teresa of Jesus was carried into the distant future to witness the exact moment in which you, upon hearing these words, would face the most important decision of your spiritual life. I saw a specific soul, Teresa wrote in her final mystical notes, a soul of the 21st century that had received all the teachings the Lord had granted me concerning cremated souls. That soul stood at the moment of the final choice. Christ himself revealed to Saint Teresa a secret he had kept hidden until that very moment. Your soul was chosen from all eternity to receive this specific knowledge at this precise moment in your life. It is no accident that you hear these words now, the Lord communicated to Teresa. It is the fulfillment of a divine plan established before the creation of the world. In that prophetic vision, Saint Teresa witnessed the 2 paths stretching before your soul in this very moment. The first path is to use this knowledge to protect your eternal destiny and to help the cremated souls who suffer in silence. The second is to set aside these teachings and continue living as though you had never received this extraordinary revelation. I saw the eternal consequences of both decisions, Teresa wrote. The soul that chooses to act according to this knowledge receives special graces of protection, increased spiritual wisdom, and a deeper union with Christ crucified. the soul that chooses to ignore these revelations faces additional responsibilities at its particular judgment. The final secret that Christ revealed to Saint Teresa concerning your specific destiny is this: your soul has the unique capacity to help liberate a minimum of 7 cremated souls during your remaining life on earth. This capacity is a specific gift, Christ explained to Teresa, granted to chosen souls who received this knowledge in preparation for a special ministry of intercession. But there is more. Saint Teresa saw that your faithful implementation of these teachings will create a multiplying effect that will extend to your descendants for 3 generations. Families that correctly apply these methods of spiritual healing, Christ revealed to Teresa, receive special protection against the modern temptations to treat the body with contempt, as though it were not a sacred temple. In her final words on this subject, Saint Teresa wrote, "To one who receives these revelations, a spiritual treasure of immeasurable value has been given. The responsibility they bear is proportionate to the worth of the gift they have received. The moment of decision has come. Saint Teresa saw in vision that after hearing these words, your soul would experience a specific interior movement of the Holy Spirit. If you feel peace and a quiet resolve to act, this is confirmation that you have been chosen for this special ministry. If you feel resistance or doubt, Christ Himself grants you additional time for discernment, but not indefinitely. As Saint Teresa prophesied more than 4 centuries ago, the soul that receives this knowledge and keeps it to itself gradually loses the capacity to receive it at all. The soul that shares it and lives by it becomes an instrument of divine mercy for generations. Your decision in this moment determines not only your own spiritual destiny, but the destiny of the cremated souls who await your intercession, and of the future generations of your family who will be shaped by the choice you make today. What will you choose?